We're back with an interesting story about Wesley Snipes and corporate America. First, Mr. Snipes. He's sitting in a Pennsylvania prison serving out a 3-year sentence for tax evasion. His crime? Cheating the government out of about $41 million. But you know what? He's a sucker, because there's a completely legal version of tax evasion called offshore tax havens. It's a method used by dozens of America's biggest corporations, companies like Facebook, Pfizer, Microsoft, Cisco, and GE, part owner of this network. They're among the companies keeping as much as $1 trillion overseas and out of the hands of the U.S. government. Google uses well-known tricks like the double Irish and the Dutch sandwich, which sounds delicious, to move billions in profits through the Netherlands and Ireland and into Bermuda. My own company, the Young Turks, has a partnership with Google. Now, these companies are not evil. They're simply doing whatever we let them get away with. But it comes at a cost. Their accounting tricks are shifting the burden onto tax-paying Americans. Now, you see that red line we're about to show you right there in that graph? Well, that's corporate tax revenues going down over the last 6 decades. And that little yellow line, that's payroll taxes that you pay going way up. You're paying more while companies pay less. And almost no one in Washington is trying to stop it. It's supposed to be the job of the government to look out for us. They're supposed to protect us from the runaway power of multinational corporations. They're supposed to be the cops on the beat. But instead, we have politicians from both sides, but especially the Republican Party, arguing to help these big companies get away with this legalized tax evasion and shift all of the costs onto us. Now let's bring in Bloomberg reporter Jesse Drucker, who just finished a fascinating article about how our tax laws encourage this situation. Jesse, it is a great article. First thing I want to ask you about is how do they do these tricks, right? What's the double Dutch sandwich or whatever, and how do they hide the money from the government?
Well, it's pretty complicated, but what it comes down to is companies do transactions between their subsidiaries where you have one unit paying another unit royalties for the use of intellectual property or various services. And the whole game is to try to get as much expenses as you can into a high-tax country like the U.S. and as much income as you can into a tax haven like Bermuda or the Cayman Islands or Switzerland.
Well, we're letting them get away with it, right? I mean, couldn't we just say, hey, you know what, when you make the money, you pay your taxes on it. That's it.
Sure. I mean, the system could be basically completely changed and, we could start from scratch and allocate profits to where they actually have sales and employees. But that's not the system that we have now.
Right. But one of the excuses that they use is that if you let them bring the money back from offshore, from Bermuda or wherever they're holding it, well, then they'll create jobs. Now, first, I want to show you some numbers on that, because we've done this before. We did it in 2004. It's called repatriation. Pfizer got $37 billion repatriated. They actually laid off 10,000 people. Merck, $15.9 billion. They laid off 7,000 people. Hewlett-Packard got back $14.5 billion, laid off 14,500. As you look at this whole list, it's all layoffs, okay? So isn't it a bit of a fraud to say, oh, well, if they bring back the money at a lower rate, out of the goodness of their heart, they'll create jobs?
Well, the thing about it that seems somewhat peculiar to make that argument is that U.S. companies right now are sitting on $2 trillion in cash already. In other words, they don't need additional cash to hire. And then when you look at the specifics of what happened the last time around, all the studies show that companies use that cash they brought back from offshore to buy back shares from their investors. It wasn't used to hire people. It wasn't used to build things. And right now, I mean, the company that's leading the charge for the repatriation tax levy right now is Cisco. And Cisco is in a situation where its stock has fallen 25% so far this year, and they want money from overseas to buy back shares and pay out dividends to its shareholders. They are not in a situation of hiring people. So buying back shares is really kind of what this is about. That's kind of all this has been about, is they want cash from offshore, tax-free, to buy back shares and pop their stock prices.
So to buttress your point, the last time they did this, they brought back $299 billion. 92% went to shareholders. It did not go towards job creation. It's not going to go towards job creation next time. But our politicians enable it. For example, I'll give you a quote from Paul Ryan. He says, quote, "It's a good idea. We ought to have it every day. Instead of having repatriation every 7 years, let's have it every single day by going to a different system." Does that mean he thinks that the corporation should only pay about 5% in taxes? Is that a crazy comment?
I mean, I guess that, the one of the most important points about this we tried to make in the story today about Cisco is whether you look at Cisco or Google or Facebook or GE or Pfizer, a repatriation holiday would essentially reward companies that are the most aggressive at pushing profits into these tax havens overseas. And so you really would have a situation where companies are going to pay an effective rate of 5% on the majority of their profits. So if we want to reward that behavior, then, potentially that's what the holiday does.
Right. And of course, most of our politicians, especially the Republicans, totally want to reward that behavior because those are the guys that pay their corporate checks, their campaign checks. And that's how this system funnels the money from the middle class to the rich and to the corporations. And it's a great article, Jesse, and I'm really glad to have had you on to talk about it.
Great.
Really
Thanks
appreciate
for having
it.
me.